Good evening. This is Wednesday Night Bible Study, Matthew chapter number 5. We are starting here in verse number 25. Matthew 5, verse number 25. This is the Sermon on the Mount series. I think we're in part number 12 here. I know this is a long series, but please, go back through this and listen to it. If you can do that, I think it'll be helpful to put everything together because we are breaking it up into shorter segments of between 30 and 45 minutes here. So Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 24, we finished with the gift and the altar. And the reason why we really hammered that verse is because this is talking about a physical gift and a physical altar, which demonstrates that Jesus Christ was a man made under the law to redeem them that were under the law. So he's giving to them a new perspective on the law, which is not new. Okay, let's make that clear. It's the way the original intent of the law was to be. It's new to the people, but it should not have been new. It should have been how they had always looked at the law. It should have been how they always, the dogs are breaking things, I'm sure. It should have been how they always saw the righteousness that is in the law. So if you look at verse number 25, it says this. It says, "Agree with thine adversary quickly." Well, already people are going to go, well, nobody does that. Right? "Agree with thine adversary quickly, whilst thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison." So what is this really talking about here? Why after just talking about leaving a gift at the altar, saying thou fool, why is it all of a sudden now he's saying agree with thine adversary quickly? What is the purpose of this? The purpose of this can be seen back with Luke chapter number 1, and then we'll also go over to Luke 12 in just a second, okay? The issue here is getting people who are ready for the ministry, who are not concerned about adversarial issues or going before a judge or saying, that guy owes me that stuff and this is mine. We don't have time for that, right? There's no time to waste. The tribulation is upon us. The gospel of the kingdom is now, and we need you to not worry about carnal issues. So if there's an issue with your adversary, agree with your adversary. Don't get into a match with him and try to go to the officer and try to get him to go back and forth, because what's going to eventually happen to you is if you lose, what will happen? You'll go to prison. And if you're in prison, can you be an effective minister of the gospel of the kingdom? No. So in Luke chapter 1, in verse number 17, we talked about what John the Baptist was to do, and Jesus Christ is picking that ministry up as well. In verse number 17, he says, verse 16, he says, "Many of the children of Israel shall turn to the Lord their God," verse 17, "and he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready," and that's the real big concept here, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So I'm gonna give you what Paul says about this, because it will kind of help bring a full circle of understanding. So go with me over the book of 2 Timothy chapter number 2. Hold your place in Luke 1. How do you become a people prepared? How do you become a people ready? How do you become a people ready and prepared for the Lord? Well, just as Paul says in 2 Timothy chapter number 2, look what he says right here, okay? Verse number 19, "Nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure." Verse 2 Timothy 2:19, "Having this seal, the Lord knoweth them that are his, and let every one that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity." We're going to see this in just a second with Christ in that cutting off, right? He says, "If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out. If thy right arm, offend thee, cut it off," right? This is the same concept. He says this, "But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth, and some to honor, and some to what? Some to dishonor." Now, how would some be of honor and some to dishonor in the kingdom? Well, back in Matthew 5, he says in verse number 19, "Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments," these are the commandments that Christ is giving you here about agreeing with your adversary, right? "And shall teach men, so he shall be called" what? "He shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called" what? "Great in the kingdom of heaven." So they receive a position of, again, authority, a position of rulership, a position of power, a position of greatness, right? Least versus great, based upon their obedience to the commandments of God, okay? So over here, back into 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 20, it says, "But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth. Meaning, there are some that are going to be, again, gold and silver is the concept of greater than what? Than those are of wood and of earth, and those of honor and some of dishonor, okay? Verse number 21, this is how it works, okay? If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel unto what? A vessel unto honor. And the way you are honored is he puts in that parentheses, or in that little parenthetical there, sanctified. Read that again. If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel. And what is a vessel to do? A vessel carries things. You use a vessel to move things from one thing to another, or to transport, or to put stuff inside. He says he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified. That's how you're unto honor, is that you're sanctified. And look at this next word. And meet, that's acceptable, or it's good. And he says, for the master's use. And look at that last word, prepared unto every good work. So what is the purpose of what Christ is trying to do? The same thing that Paul's saying there. It's the same type of concept here. He's telling them, look, you guys need to understand what the law is. You need to understand your unrighteousness, okay? We need to teach you what true righteousness is, and then we want you to practice that. And how do they do that? We'll see that come in a minute. But looking again at that, the purging yourself and being a people prepared for the Lord, he needs people who aren't going to be concerned if there's a problem that arises up and they need to take it to an adversary. No, we don't have time for that. No, there's no time. If somebody stole somebody stole something, what does Christ say? He says, just give it to him. If somebody asks you if you're a cook, just give it to him. If somebody says go a mile, okay, whatever, we'll just do it. Whatever it is, why are you doing that? It's because it's showing there's a bigger motivation here and a bigger motive that's there, which is the gospel, the kingdom, and the proclamation of it, right? That's why he says in verse number 40, if anyone will sue thee at the law and take away thy coat, just whatever, let him have it, right? Let him have it. It doesn't matter, okay? Now, do people practice that today? No. I mean, you know how many churches are in heated litigation battles all the time? Members of the churches are in heated litigation battles, right? So you have to realize, like, these people are prepared to do a specific work in a specific period of time, and what was specifically coming upon them. The days of judgment. I mean, that's what was next for them. I mean, there was no thought process that there would be a long-standing dispensation of the grace of God. There was no thought process that they would just completely remove, the prophetical element of the tribulation and proceed with this new concept of grace. It wasn't there. It doesn't happen, okay? So when you see this, agree with thine adversary quickly while thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to prison, deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. This is also a twofold kind of parable, because he's also saying, look, when you do all this, make it very clear, if you go to law with that, you're breaking my commandment, you're going to be called the least, and you're going to pay for it. Really? Is that what he's really saying? Yes. Verse number 26, he says, verily I say unto you, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. He's saying this in a twofold parable sense. He's saying that literally you're going to do it because they're going to put you in there and they're going to just, you're going to have to just sit in the prison until you've done whatever needs to be paid. And then secondfold, from a spiritual perspective, you're going to owe me. You're going to be in trouble. Look at Luke chapter number 12. The reason why this all comes together, and I see it in my mind, is because I've gone over this so many times, and I hope that I can just give that to you. I hope you can see, okay, wow, I see what Jason sees, because in my mind, I have this thought process about how all these verses work and how everything just kind of is laid out based upon just reading it. So it's kind of what the chart does in the same sense. It just provides you with that big, kind of view, and that's what I'm trying to give to you guys. In Luke chapter 12, verse number 49, we were talking about why they need to do this is because that impending tribulation is coming, right? That wrath of God is coming. There's no time for grace. It's time for wrath, right? And that's why in Luke chapter 12 verse 49, we'll read this. Look what he says, okay? I am come to send fire on the earth. And what will I if it be already kindled? The fire comes upon the children of disobedience. The fire comes upon those who are deserving of the wrath of God. It comes upon people. and it's kindled, meaning that all the people are so wicked that God's ready to pour that wrath out, correct? Yes. So in verse number 50 he says, but I have a baptism to be baptized with, and we understand that to be his death, right? And how am I straitened? That is, he's restricted till it be accomplished, meaning the next thought process in his mind is Christ's mind, while on the earth, he says, I die, I'm raised again, and I come back with a vengeance, right? Yeah. When you read, look what he says, verse 51. People say, well, didn't he say in Isaiah chapter, 53 and 51 and 50 and all those other ones that in Isaiah 9 where he says, wonderful counselor, mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace? Didn't they say all those things? And aren't you supposed to be the Prince of Peace? And if you read in verse 51, it says, suppose ye that I'm come to give peace on earth? I tell you nay, but rather division. And this division is because what? Inside of the house, the people are going to get real ticked off at each other. He's trying to get the people all to agree. All the nation of Israel. It has nothing to do with the world. It has everything to do with Israel. And he says, inside of Israel, I'm trying to get you to be a people prepared for the Lord. I'm trying to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children to the fathers, and the wisdom to those that are just and wise. And he says, for from henceforth there shall be 5 in one house divided. See this? 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. The father shall be divided against the son against the father, and the mother against the daughter against the mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. So how's that working out in terms of that gathering of those people to be a people prepared for the Lord? What are they doing? They're rejecting the word of their brethren. They're saying, no, I don't believe what you're saying. The gospel of the kingdom isn't here. I don't believe that Jesus is the Christ. I don't believe any of that bunk that John the Baptist was talking about. I'm just going to continue to do what I'm going to do. See, when the next words out of his mouth are so critical. Because, as I said before, when Jesus gives that new perspective on the law, it's not new. Okay? It's new to them because why? Because they were taught incorrectly their whole life. But it's not new information. It's always been there. It's always been the law. So over here, when he says in verse number 54, he's basically rebuking them for not being able to see that. Like, once somebody tells you that, you should go, oh, wow. I mean, when somebody introduced me to the gospel of the grace of God and presented out some dispensational biblical truth, the light bulb went off, and I said, yeah, that makes a whole lot more sense. I understand that, because I always wondered how the heck we're not in the tribulation at this point in time, and where in the world is Jesus, and all the other questions that you have about where did Israel go, what happened to Israel, why did they not do all the things that they were supposed to do? Oh, is there a spiritual Israel? Then if there's spiritual Israel, how then is there a whole issue of national Israel and the prophetical element? All of those things. Is all prophecy fulfilled? Is preterism real? All those questions can be answered by basic dispensational truth, understanding really just the dispensation of the grace of God, and Paul being that, again, wise master builder of that plan, with God, again, being the GC. So if you look at verse number 54, it says, and he said also to the people, he says, when ye see a cloud rise out of the west, straightway, right? Without a doubt, you don't even hesitate. You say, there cometh the shower, and so it is. And when ye see the south wind blow, ye say, well, there will be heat. And guess what? It cometh to pass. He says, ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky and of the earth. But how is it that ye do not discern what? This time. So what is he telling them? You should already know what I'm doing here. You should already be completely familiar with what the next step is in the program. This shouldn't be something that I have to instruct you in, but I do. And why is that? Because they've brought themselves and given to themselves teachers and preachers who have led them astray, and as a result, they have all gone in their own way. And so Jesus Christ, trying to gather that lost sheep of the house of Israel, trying to get the flock back together, and he's doing the best he can in the sense that he's not overriding the free will of man. He's not. If he wanted all of them to be saved, he would do it, right? But he doesn't, because why? Some to honor, some to dishonor. They're going to do what they're going to do, and they'll pay the penalty for that. In verse number 57, he says, yea, and why even of yourselves judge ye not what is right? Now look at this in verse 58. This is the exact same thing that he's saying to you in Matthew 5. When thou goest with thine adversary to the magistrate, as thou art in the way, give diligence that thou mayest be delivered from him. Whoa. What is he giving you more clarity in? He's saying you need to get out of there. Don't let that magistrate take you to the next level. The magistrate's going to determine, okay, do we have cause here? If you get a traffic citation here in Pinellas County and you want to go fight your traffic citation, I want to go fight my traffic. Okay, great. You know where you're going to go? You're going to go down to South County traffic or North County traffic, depending on whether or not you got your ticket on the Ulmerton line. So if you're, south of Ulmerton or north of Ulmerton is based upon where you go, North or South County. So let's say you're South County and you go down to the courthouse down there on 66th Street there by Tyrone. You know who you're going to go in front of? You're not going to go in front of a judge. You're going to go in front of a magistrate. You know what a magistrate is? Just a lawyer. Just a lawyer that gets paid some money to go there and listen to what happens, right? And so what happens is, okay, if you don't want to listen to what the magistrate says, what can you do? Well, you can take that to the next level, and I want to take it to the judge. And so what Christ is saying here, he's like, look, when you're there with the magistrate, which is, it's the lower level, get out of there. Don't let that guy go any further. Do whatever you have to do. Agree with thine adversary. Just do whatever is necessary to not get in trouble and get into prison. Because why? Because you can't be really effective doing your ministry if you're in prison. So he says, when thou goest with thine adversary to the magistrate, as thou art in the way, give diligence that thou mayest be delivered from him, lest he hale thee to the judge. See, there's your scale of how it works. It's so funny because we do the same thing today. People read the Bible, that King James is so ridiculous, all those words and all. Here's the thing. If I say something like phosphines, does anybody know what a phosphine is? That must not be a word, right? I must just be stupid because I said phosphines. Is it a word? It's absolutely a word. Does it have a definition? Yes. Does it not make it a word if you don't know the definition to it? No. Phosphines are when you close your eyes really hard and you squint or you push on your eyes, or you look at a light and then you look away and you see all those little lights. That's what we call phosphines. So it's something that you don't necessarily know the definition of, but doesn't mean it's not a word. So when somebody says, the King James Bible is so difficult to understand with all those words, you can't. Is it really? There's still words. You can look them up. And the Bible defines itself many times. That's an aside. But anyways, he says, lest he hale thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and the officer cast thee into prison. Now look at verse 59. He says, I tell thee, thou shalt not depart thence till what? Till thou hast paid the very last mite. Let's just take this thing full circle. Let's not even waste any time. We're already, 15 minutes in. Let's just keep reading through Matthew 5 here, and let's just get right into the meat of this thing, okay? Verse number 27, he says, okay, I told you about the adversary. Now I'm going to say this. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time. What does that mean? That's not what God said. This is what man said. Man said, thou shalt not commit adultery. That's what man said, meaning God said it too, but what you anticipate that is the word commit, right? You shall not commit. What is commit to them? Commit is the action, not the what? Not the thought crime, not the intent, not the, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, the actus reus, which underneath the law is the actual act, and then the mens rea, which is what? Which is the guilty mind. So you could be, walking in an Old Navy, and your buddy thinks it's really funny to pull a shirt off the rack and stick it in the back of your back pocket, and you walk out, right? Did you commit the act of stealing or act of removing the property? Yes. Did you have the mens rea, meaning you knowingly knew? No, right? So what God does is he's going down to that mens rea aspect. He's going down to that intent. He's saying, look, but I say unto you, now look at this, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So where is this happening? Can anybody see the heart? Really, can anybody see the heart? Sorry about that. Put it on vibrate. No, nobody can see the heart. But who does see the heart? God sees the heart, right? How does God look? Look at Matthew chapter 6 and verse number 18. He says, that thou appear not unto men to fast, but unto the Father which is in secret, and the Father which what? Which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. So what this is coming down to is this is the intent of the law, okay? The intent of the law with adultery, the penalty for that is what? Is death. We just looked the other day on Sunday, we looked at David, right? We looked at David and how he committed adultery and how quickly, we think, well, how long did he sit there before God forgave him? Well, Nathan already told him he was forgiven. I mean, right away, God forgave you. Wow. I mean, it was so quickly that he did so, and that pardon, that mercy that David got is something that everybody goes back to. Even Paul in Romans chapter number 4 goes back to it and says, wow, even as David described the blessedness, right, of the man to whom the Lord will not impute sin. So this issue of the intent, the death penalty for it is seen in Leviticus 20:10. We don't need to turn to all these passages. In Leviticus and Exodus chapter number 20, in the giving of the 10 Commandments, they say in there, thou shalt not commit adultery, right? In Deuteronomy chapter number 5, look at this. In Deuteronomy, this is the second giving of the law, right? To the next generation, the explanation to them is, look, don't be like the previous generation. Make sure you get this and understand it. I mean, I always joke around and say, did your parents ever say, I'm not going to tell you again? Right? And it's kind of like, how many times you have to be told? Remember your parents saying that? How many times do I have to tell you? Because what is that? Well, if you tell me the third time and you don't do it and you mess up on the third time, oh, you're in huge trouble. The first time, okay, we let it slide. Second time, third time, no, it's over. You know better, right? And that's what he's saying here in Deuteronomy chapter number 5. Look at this. Deuteronomy chapter number 5 in verse number 15. He says, and remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out of thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. Honor the father and thy mother as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee, that thy days may be prolonged, and that it may go well with thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Or neither shalt thou commit adultery. Neither shalt thou steal. Neither shalt thou bear false witness against thy neighbor. Now look at verse 21. Neither shalt thou desire thy neighbor's wife. Well, that was one that wasn't necessarily in the Exodus 20, but he's kind of saying, I'm gonna give you a little bit more here. I know I said, thou shalt not commit adultery, but he's also saying, neither shalt thou desire thy neighbor's wife. Neither shalt thou covet thy neighbor's house, his field, or his manservant, because the act of coveting is something that, again, who can see the covet? Who can see coveting? Only God can see coveting. I mean, you could talk about coveting, but unless you talked about it and you did it in your heart, nobody else would know but God. So if you look at the book of John, chapter number 8, we can see an execution of the law of Moses by those in authority on the woman caught in adultery. John chapter number 8, starting in verse number 1, it says, Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes, I always joke around, I have in my Bible here, preaching and doctrine written here. I have no music. Jesus didn't come in and sit in the synagogue and break out his banjo and his electric guitar and say, let's just get a circle going here. Let's get a drum circle, No, he was about the preaching and the doctrine, okay? He says, and the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they say unto her, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Verse 5, now Moses... See, what are they trying to do? They're trying to pin Jesus against Moses. He says, now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what sayest thou? And this is such an often misquoted, misused piece of scripture. I've actually preached just a whole sermon just on this, and you can go back and listen to it. But he says this. This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. Why? Because if Jesus says that she doesn't deserve to die, then what? He's breaking the law of Moses. He's speaking contrary to the law of Moses, and we know that's not something that Jesus Christ would have done. He's a man made under the law. He has to keep that law in entirety. He came to fulfill that law. Like he says, but Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. And people always say, well, what did he really write? Did he write in the stone? Did he write in the sand? Nobody knows, okay? Anybody? And there's a whole book called He Wrote in the Stone, and it's about how Jesus Christ wrote in the stone. I mean, nobody knows, all right? You can conjecture and make ideas up, and this is all we got, all right? He says, verse number 7, so when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them. Now notice, he never once says, what? No, don't stone her. He doesn't ever say, oh, no, don't worry about what Moses says. What does he really do? He takes the issue of the law and he says, you don't understand the law. Let's look at it from the perspective how I see it. He says, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. So what is he saying? He's saying the judgment of her will be completely 100% just if somebody just was doing it. Right? Is he saying that they shouldn't stone her? No, they're just saying, he that is without sin cast the first stone. Meaning, any of you guys here righteous enough to cast the stone to kill her? Then if you are, then you may do so. That's what he's saying. And so as you read down back in verse number 8, and again he stooped down and wrote on the ground more. So of course there's all these conjectures. Some people say he was writing out all of their thoughts, all of their sins that they've ever committed. Some people say he was writing the rest of the law of Moses. It's interesting. It could kind of be that way, but who really knows, right? And when they heard it, now notice this, and they which heard it, being convicted by what? Being convicted by their own conscience. So as soon as he says he is without sin, what are those many people thinking? They're thinking back to every sin they've ever committed, and they go, 1, 2, 4,000, 300 million. I mean, they're just going through every single sin they've committed, and they're going, all right, is it just? Is it just for the unjust to take the life of the unjust? Everybody likes the concept of justice. We've talked about it before. We just saw the one recently. We saw justice for Casey Anthony, right? We wanted justice for Trayvon Martin, and we wanted justice for the other dude up in wherever it was, right? Where was it at? Missouri? St. Louis, right? I don't remember his name, right? But everybody's screaming justice over this type of thing. They want the justice, they demand the justice, and see what that is when you demand the justice, you condemn yourself. Why? Because you're not just. So if you want to kill this lady, you better kill yourself too because you're guilty. Especially as it looks in relation to how the law really is, meaning how Christ understands the law to be and how its true intent is. So that's why if you look here in verse 9 it says, and there's so much we could talk about. I would love to talk about the conviction and the conscience in John 5 and all this stuff, but we don't have time. He says, verse 9, and they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had lifted up himself, and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Where are they? Hath no man condemned thee? And what does he say in verse 11? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and what? Sin no more. See, a lot of people like to leave that last part off. He still rebuked her for the sin of adultery. He could have killed her, but what does he give her? He gives her the sure mercies of David, just like David got, right? He can do that, can't he? Of course he can. Now, would it be completely fair of him to pick up a stone and crush her skull? Yep. And do people understand that? People say, that's just, how is that possibly fair? You do it all the time. You do it to all kinds of people. Their law says adultery is that way. Go to the Middle East. Their law still says adultery is that way. It's still if you go through the history of American law, you can look at rape. Rape was a capital crime. Yeah. They used to have rape of children was considered to be it was called capital sexual battery, and you could be put to death for the rape of a child. Capital sexual battery in Florida till like 80 something. Think about that. So don't think this is like crazy that they would do something along these lines, okay? So I could really go through a bunch of this about how Jesus Christ did come into the world. He came down into the world to condemn, and that's the whole John 3 thing. And again, I would love to spend a lot of time, but you can listen to the sermon that we've done it, right? So just like with David, God forgives, and He can provide underneath His own justice pardons, right? He can pardon. Now, does the law offer any pardon? No. Where are you going to get the pardon from? from Christ, right? That's where the focus is going to be. You got to get the pardon from Christ. It ain't coming from the law. It ain't coming from any of your accusers. It's only going to come from me. And that's why when he forgives those sins and he says, I forgive your sin, and everybody looks at him and says, how can you forgive sin? There's only one that can forgive sin, and that's God. Are you God? And then what does he say? You said it, not me. They understood who he was at that point in time. All right, so the mindset of these people here in terms of the law is they think they understand it. They think they get it. They think they're complying with the law. And so when Christ says, but I say unto you, this is a changing of their mind. Look at Romans chapter number 2. This is the mindset here, okay? Romans chapter number 2, verse number 17, okay? This is the mindset of the Jew who has been taught. This is the mindset of the Jew in Matthew 5. This is how they think. They compare themselves to the general population. They know they're more educated in the law. Deuteronomy 4. Ecclesiastes 12, there's a bunch. But he says this, look at this. Behold, thou art called a Jew, and restest in the law, and makest thy boast of God, and knowest his will. Wow, how do you know God's will? Is it in the law? It is. And he says, and approvest the things that are more excellent, being instructed out of the law, and art confident that thou thyself art a guide of the blind, a light of them which are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, which hast the form of knowledge, and of the truth in the law. Thou therefore which teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? Thou that preachest a man should not steal, dost thou steal? The answer to that question is, yes, you do steal, and we can show you. Verse number 22, thou that sayest a man should not commit adultery, dost thou commit adultery? Yes, the answer again is yes. Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege? The answer is yes. Thou that makest thy boast of the law through breaking the law, dishonorest thou God? Of course. Verse 24, for the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written. Verse 25, for circumcision verily profiteth, if thou keep the law. But if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. This is what Christ is, he's really getting to this. Their confidence in the flesh, their confidence in what other people have told them is wrong, and that they are going to experience a judgment, and that I'm trying to make this as clear as possible, and that the judgment that is going to come upon them is imminent, meaning that the tribulation is coming and the wrath of God comes upon those. Now, do you want to participate in the wrath of God, or do you want to escape the wrath of God? And how do they escape the wrath of God? Well, they remove themselves from those other people, right? Don't be partakers with them. The wrath of God comes upon them. They're not partakers. They get away. They flee. When you hear about the abomination of desolation, what do? Get out. Get out of the way. I mean, Jerusalem's going to blow up. You better run. You better flee to the hills. You better flee to the mountains, right? Because the wrath of God comes. Now, are there by casualties? Of course. There's casualties as a result of people who die because of their inability to choose to leave. Doesn't mean they go to hell. Let me show you a couple verses on this, okay? So number one, God says that adultery is the lusting. He says if you look on a woman, you've already committed adultery. So I think that makes everybody in the room guilty, all right? Yes. Nobody here is going to say, oh, no, it never happened. Okay. Lie to yourself then. Be like the rich young ruler who says, oh, I've done all those since my mother's youth, right? Or since my youth. God looks at the heart. He sees in secret, as we said in 6:18. And he says that nothing is hid that won't be uncovered. Mark chapter 4 and verse number 22. It says in Romans chapter 2 verse 16 that God will judge the secrets of men. There's no secrets to God. So the more you think about that, probably the better, right? There's no secrets to God. He sees everything. He knows everything you do, right? You remember the little song when you were a little kid, hears all you say and he sees all you do, so you better behave as you should. Remember that song? Come on, Jamie, John. Nobody's heard that one? Oh my goodness. You know, okay, whatever. I'll play it for you. I'm sure it's a Patch the Pirate. If you know who Patch the Pirate is, Google him. He's a pirate and he sings in churches. And he has one eyeball. He's really legitimately a pirate. Okay. So what the question next is, okay, well, all the people should be sitting at 28 and saying what? Well, they're all condemned, right? Nobody in 28 is going to, after verse 28, is thinking, we're in trouble, right? We're in trouble. So verse number 29 is the option here. Verse number 29 is, okay, here's your choice. We talked in 2 Timothy chapter 2 about the removing of the flesh. We talked about the removing of the purging yourself of the sin so that you can be a vessel, meet, and sanctified and ready for the master's use, right? We talked about that. And so this is what he's getting to. He's basically saying, if you got all this sin, nobody, what are people going to do? I mean, you're not ready to do the work. And nobody's going to look at you and say, wow, look at all the good works you do, and let's glorify your Father which is in heaven. No, they're going to say, look at you, you two-faced hypocrite. You're just like the scribes and the Pharisees. So he's saying, and this must be understood with this, I have written in my Bible, remember the righteousness needed to enter the kingdom. Right? So what is he telling them? Has he given them any hope yet? Has he given them any gospel? No. What has he simply done? He's given them the law. And what is the law? Condemnation. What is it? It's the ministration of death. Should everybody leave that room or that area here that he's preaching without any eyes and without any limbs? Yes. So as you read in verse number 29, he says, if thy right eye offend thee. To offend means to do what? They call it a criminal offense, right? What does that mean? You've offended the law. Well, who have you offended? The law. Who have you really offended, though? You've offended God, right? He says, if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. Now notice, why? Why would I do that? Why would I want to cut my eye out? Because it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, meaning your eye perisheth, it dies. That what? And not that thy whole body should be what? Cast into hell. This is actual sanctification. People will say, well, see, Christ really isn't talking about that. He's just giving them a lesson. What? You ever heard of the thing called circumcision? They'll say, well, because they're not supposed to cut themselves. You ever heard of circumcision? Yeah, they cut themselves. They cut the flesh of their, So they cut themselves and they did bleed. And they don't have sharp, razor blades like we have now. So there's a whole verse. I could go into the one. We might look at it later, but it's really a disgusting verse. I mean, there's one where they pile up the foreskins up to the mountaintops. They're really high. We got another one where they made a mess and they said they were completely bloody. And he says, "You're a bloody man for doing the." And that's the part of the thing that he's showing is that the same thing with the sacrifices. The purpose of the sacrifices, the reason why they're so bloody and so dirty, is to show you, you see how bloody and dirty that is. That's how you look to God with all the sin you have on you. And so what you need is the covering. And of course, he's saying the death that they experience with the sacrifices is really just it's what you should have experienced, and having the kill is the penalty for the wrong. So, anyways, this is actual sanctification. It's practical sanctification. Okay, so the circumcision of the flesh and the removal of the flesh. You can look at Genesis chapter 17. We don't have time to get through all of that. We're going to be done here in just a minute, but this is. I want to close with these few verses here. Look at Colossians chapter number 2. And then Colossians 3. Colossians 2 and verse number 11. He says this, in whom also ye are circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, in putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. Now, was there any circumcision that actually occurred? Was there any actual cutting? No. But see, what Christ is talking about in Matthew 5 is he's saying, this is another circumcision. Here's another one for you. Cut out your eyeballs. Yeah, cut them out. Why? Because they're causing you to break the law. And what do you need? You need to be without sin to enter into the kingdom. Yes. Only the righteous inherit the kingdom of God. That's the scary truth for them. They don't understand it, right? They're like, whoa, how are we going to be righteous? How is a man going to be right with God? They get the answer to that later on. Going to Colossians chapter 3 and verse number 5, read this. He says, mortify therefore your members. What does that mean? Mortify is like cut off, right? The same concept, right? But mortify is to execute what? Self-will. Mortify therefore your members. What does a mortician do? Treat something as if it's dead. So when the mortifying of the flesh is the mortifying of the sin, is you treat it as if it's dead. Why? Because your whole body's dead, right? Didn't he say that? I mean, if you go look at verse number 12 of Colossians 2, buried with him in baptism, wherein also you are risen with him through the faith of the operation of God who hath raised him from the dead, and you being dead in your sins and the circumcision of your flesh. That's where you always sit. Your sin, that never changes. Do you understand that? You're dead in sins, and the circumcision of your flesh always stays that way, in the sense that your flesh is always that way. Your flesh is always dead. He says here, he hath thee quickened together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses. So your flesh still experiences that, but there's the judicial end of the pardon. That makes sense. Meaning you don't fully remove yourself of all sin. That's just not possible. And that's why if you go through in verse number 14, he says, blotting out the handwriting of the ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. And then having spoiled, he says, principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing in that. There's so many verses in this talking about the fleshly mind. Really, we could talk for hours. Let's try to get back on track here for verse 5 for a second of chapter 3. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, covetousness, which is idolatry. He says, for which things, look at this, sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience. So you don't want to participate in that, of course, if you were in the tribulation. But number two, Paul's not necessarily talking about that. He's more talking. There's a whole big thing too I want to talk about. Don't have time for it, but look at the movie After the Tribulation. Look at it up and take a peek at it on YouTube. Just watch it. We'll talk about it another time. We don't have time for it right now. After the Tribulation, it's a whole movie on YouTube. It's like 2.5 hours long. Just if you have time. Anyways, yeah, I'm sure you have plenty of time to watch it, but he says this, in which also ye also walk sometime when ye lived in them, but now ye also put off all these, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth, lying not one to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on again the new man. And of course, all that stuff is the explanation. Okay, so again, for these guys here in Matthew chapter 5, they don't have that full picture of understanding. Right? They're not getting all that information. They're just getting the condemnation of the law, and they're looking to Christ to be the ultimate provider of their righteousness eventually. They haven't gotten that yet, okay? So if you close, we'll close with this. Look at Matthew 18, and we'll close with this passage. While you're flipping to Matthew 18, verse number 6, I'm going to read this to you one more time. He says, ye have heard it said of them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. Actually, let me start back up with verse number 25. Agree with thine adversary quickly while thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Verily I say unto you, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. Perfect righteousness is needed. Matthew 18, verse number 6. Read this with me. But whosoever shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged around his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offenses. For it must need be that offenses come, but woe to the man by whom the offense cometh. Offenses are what? Offenses are the offending of God, but they're the offense. They're the breaking of the law. He says, wherefore if thy hand or thy foot offend thee, cut them off and cast them from thee, for it is better for thee to enter into life, what? Halt or maimed. So now think about that for a second. They're going to physically walk into the kingdom halt or maimed without an arm, without an eyeball, without a leg, whatever it is that's causing them to offend thee, right? Rather than have 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into everlasting fire. What is he really demonstrating? He's demonstrating perfect righteousness, which is what is needed to enter the kingdom, and which we understand. Are they getting it from the law? No, they can't get it from the law, right? Even if they cut off all their members, they're still not going to get it. Why? Because their heart. How is their heart going to be purified? So look what he says in verse number 9. And if thy eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life with one eye rather than having two eyes to be cast into hellfire. Life and the kingdom are synonymous. He says in verse 10, Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones, for I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. We've already preached on that. You can listen to the sermon on angels. Verse 11, For the Son of Man is come to save that which was lost. How think ye, if a man have 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray, doth he not leave the 99 and go into the mountains, and seeketh that which is gone astray? And if so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoiceth more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father which is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. Not before the adversary, right? He says, If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. That's according to the law. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. And of course you'll say, yes, for the church. No, this isn't the church. This is those who are the called out ones. These are the ones who are the leadership, right? Those who are not... What's the best way to say it? Like the church in the wilderness. We don't have time to talk about all that right now, but we'll get into it. He says, But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as an heathen man and a publican. Now look at this. Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall be loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say unto you that if 2 of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. And he says, For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of you. And then I would like to talk about all this. I'm just going to kind of close this out with this last part, okay? Look at, you know what, just read it. 21 to 35, we'll be done. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. Notice that. When he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him, which owed him 10,000 talents. But for as much as he had not had to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and children, and all that he had, and the payment to be made. And the servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion, and loosed him, and forgave the debt. But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence. And he laid hands on him, and he took him by the throat, saying, Pay me that thou owest. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, I will pay thee all. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay his debt. So when his fellow servants saw what was done, they were very sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after that he had called him, and said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt, because thou desirest. Shouldest not thou also had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due him. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not every one his brother their trespass. I just think about that and I'm like, wow, that's some scary stuff, right? These people must be thinking, wow, he's serious about this. He's absolutely dead serious about this. And next week I'm going to show you how that parable here in Matthew 5 is laid out about being cast into the prison until you've paid the uttermost farthing, and how that works. How are you going to pay for that? How does that work? How is he here saying you're going to be you'll be delivered to the tormentors till you should pay all that was due in him? So likewise my heavenly Father shall do also unto you. How is he going to deliver them to the tormentors until they what? Until they forgive, until they pay what's owed? Does that sound like what Paul talks about in terms of the forgiveness that Christ has given unto you? That you forgive your brother because Christ has forgiven you, and that you've been forgiven all trespasses? Does it look as if God's going to hold something against the nation of Israel? Is it possible that the operation of God can vary with the nation of Israel and the body of Christ? Has to. Because there's contradictory issues if not. So we'll discuss that. So next week, if you'll look at Galatians 5, that will also help us a little bit. And we'll close in prayer.